Now there's so many things we could start with, for so many different reasons. Let's get started.
Another race for the world's greatest driver, Juan Manuel Fangio.
Former world champion Jim Clark leapt into the lead. That's Clark's Lotus going like a bomb.
And James Hunt is the world champion by just one single point.
By being a racing driver, you are under risk all the time. And if you no longer go for a gap that exists, you're no longer a racing driver.
And that is Michael Schumacher ahead, the world champion.
To become a four-time world champion, Sebastian Vettel, Lewis Hamilton, champion of the world.
That's for all the kids out there who dream the impossible.
Max Verstappen is champion of the world.
Oh my God! Max Verstappen, you are the world champion! The world champion!
Hello and welcome to episode 6 of F1 in Review 2023. I'm Tom Clabon and as ever I'm joined by Tristan Fancourt as we look back at round 2, the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix once more, but we also look forward to round 3 of the upcoming Australian Grand Prix. So let's start with a topic which ended last episode in part, McLaren. They're bottom of the Constructors' Championship after 2 races. The highest out of the drivers finishes P15. And now, when you thought things can get any more chaotic, if you will, their technical director James Key has left, with the role being split between 3 different technical directors under the team principal of Andrea Sella. So, with all this happening, Tristan, to your team, how are you feeling?
Oh, goodness gracious me. It reminds me a lot of sort of McLaren gone by. I think we've slipped backwards a bit. I don't know about you, but when I read the statement, because I saw it flashed up originally on my Twitter feed, and I was like, oh no, this isn't good. This isn't good at the moment. Whenever McLaren pops up on my Twitter, it's usually because something goes terribly wrong. But the big news, it was James Key leaving. Now, James Key, him arriving at McLaren in 2018 was suggested to be a bit of a coup because he was technical director at Toro Rosso between 2012 and up until 2018 and brought with him a huge amount of experience. He was in Sauber, he worked for Force India, Spiker, going back to, 1998 really. So he is one of the leading experts, or was one of the leading experts, I should say, in Formula One, been around and really helped Toro Rosso progress. And I think McLaren expected him to be able to join the team and progress them forwards. And clearly, I reckon he did do that because if he was there since 2018, then he was there for the progression up until I think really the peak. Would you say in 2021?
Yep.
Yeah, and now things have gone back the wrong way. It was a pretty disastrous year for McLaren last year, especially at the beginning. And I think McLaren says he's parted ways, but I think that's, low-key fired.
Yeah.
It reminds me of sort of Eric Boulier, if you remember him at McLaren, who was, in the words of Angus, offensively French. He always looked very, very unhappy. Although maybe that was because he was leading McLaren during the dark days 2015, 2016, until he eventually left the team there. And he kind of left in the same way, I think, actually. He left the team fired, but they don't really want to say fired because that's kind of embarrassing. And so now McLaren is, again, in this turmoil. And it kind of reminds me of one of the opening podcasts we did for this particular season, Tom, when I said that reports from McLaren suggested that upper management were not as good as they should have been, and there was a lot of disruption there. So it clearly those reports from McLaren staff were right, and actually upper management did need to be changed.
Yeah, no smoke without fire, right? Reading the team's statements, or Zach Brown's statements and others, they seem very, very confident insofar as saying, oh, no, this has been in the work for many a month. We've got good upgrades coming for round 4, that being the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. But I think, really, this has been papering over the cracks, the past car of the 2019 season, if you will. There's been much damage done by COVID. for many different reasons, but the fact that McLaren and other cars were essentially able to roll over their cars with 2 seasons, maybe papered over the cracks. There was good work done for 1 season, and that's had a prolongment of success. But when it comes to redesigning and going again, McLaren have fallen by the wayside a bit, and I'm still not convinced that they are going to get these magic upgrades, these silver bullets, if you will, and then boom, be back up there with, let's say, Mercedes, Ferrari, even Aston Martin, really. And I understand why this change has happened, but part of me thinks the moment that you have a failure to reach said targets or indeed deadlines before they actually go into testing, go into practice, then in my mind that is an offence which should deem serious sanction. We saw this previously with Williams, of course, where they, in extremis, failed to bring a car to testing, but this doesn't fall too short of that, too far away from the ultimate disaster, if you will. And you've got to question yourself again. Hey, I hate to sort of repeat myself and don't want to rehash old words, but I don't see how McLaren, a team who's able to bring in Oscar Piastri, essentially prize him away from Alpine with promises of a decent salary, I imagine, a good car, at the top for many a season, how they can do that in one hand with some clear evidence to go and show him, oh, we're not just saying this isn't just blagging, if you will, we have evidence to back this up, with really them tumbling down to the very bottom of the constructors as is. Now, it remains to be seen how far they will rise up, or indeed they will rise up. I don't think they'll finish last, but compare that to seasons gone by where we had McLaren vying for P3, P4 in the constructors, getting a 1-2 in Italy. Many successes to literally not finishing last being the sort of very low bar of success, if you will. So I think that James Key going is almost a sign, be it sort of a public relations sign, if you will, an optic sign to say we're doing something, which is a good step, arguably too late. But part of me thinks that there'll be more changes that have to come along, be that further up, be that in different paddocks, for example, or indeed in each driver's rooms, because I don't think this is just a James Key problem. I fail to see how separating these roles into 3 different ones, which I'm not wholly against, but doing that is somehow going to go and magic up some success that was, failing to appear in times gone by in terms of maybe last season and occasions and the start of this one, really. And bear in mind as well that you've got David Sanchez coming in from Ferrari, which is brilliant. I saw that, I thought fantastic. They're bringing someone in from a well-known sporting team, one of the best, one of the oldest in Formula One there
as well.
He does indeed. It's a shrewder appointment from what I see. But when I see he's joining next year, 2024, January 1st, owing to him being on gardening leave after leaving Ferrari for obvious reasons, that's again a solution for further down the track. So I fail to see how McLaren are so calm and so fine about this all, and somehow thinking that they're going to rise up again because it's almost what they do. Because as we saw in 2015, 2016, it isn't very simple to go and rise up again once you fall. Many thought, would McLaren fall as they did in 2014, 15, 16? They did. They've done it again. Do you think they're capable of shooting up again within this season, or are we looking at another period of wilderness maybe?
Well, if it is a period of wilderness, they're going to have to satisfy their sponsors. I don't know if you saw, Tom, today they announced that they've decided to partner from 2023, a multi-year partnership with Workday, a system for finance, HR, and planning.
Ironic.
God, that's literally drilled into my mind every time I hear Workday. A system for finance. I won't say it again. Yeah, so they are, if they are having to clearly, well, I don't know, they're going to have to balance the sponsorship pressures because they have so many partners now. It's absolutely ridiculous. And I don't know, maybe it's all about the money, because they got to pay Daniel Ricciardo $20 million for doing nothing. But that wouldn't be my priority at the moment if I was them, and getting even more sponsors on, because I think, I guess more is always more, but they're going to start losing them if they don't start getting performance. It is well known in Formula One that you only get sponsors when you're doing well. I mean, look at Haas and how they basically, their sponsorship just collapsed. And sort of peaking of that collapse in about 2020. Now it's picking back up again. 2015, McLaren had no one, basically no one sponsoring them. They were desperate for sponsors because they had fallen to the wayside and fallen right back. Williams lost basically all their sponsorships because they've dropped to the back. So maybe they're trying to do a multi-deal partnership now whilst they can get people on board, because if this lasts for longer, then they're going to be in some real trouble. Now, David Sanchez, he is a good pick for the role, and as you say, they've split it into 3 roles. If you don't know, he worked for Renault and then McLaren in 2007, and he was part of the team that developed the F duct.
Oh yes,
and so clearly an ingenious gentleman, and that's part of the reason why he eventually got up to Ferrari and basically led the design for developing the 2022 Ferrari car. We know how good that was.
Yep.
So this is perhaps a good move. Maybe it is a good move. Maybe they are growing, and the key to McLaren's success is dumping people like James Key and moving into this restructured system to I guess delegate across in sort of a horizontal direction of a hierarchy rather than having everything on one person, because often that doesn't work. But I can't help but thinking that they've got a long way to go. They've got a long way to go, especially from the back, which I believe McLaren now are. And if you ask Piastri, I don't know, I'd start doubting myself, start doubting my choices, because he was supposed to have left Alpine for a superior car, more prosperous Formula One career, but he might have accidentally Fernando Alonso'd himself.
Exactly. And with talk of there being upgrades, serious upgrades, as I say, they're coming at Azerbaijan, do you think we're looking at the next couple of races as a make or break for McLaren, really? Or can they survive, or can they get away with some more duff performances where they're finishing outside the points?
But Tom, they're already diminishing those upgrades. They said, please do not expect us to be getting the good performance out from these upgrades. These upgrades are incremental, and they've already started playing down the development of them.
No, that's very fair. No, not good at all. Not good at all. But when there's talk of them hoping these upgrades make them more competitive, as you say, the language there, I mean, looking back at how competitive McLaren were previously, you'd say more competitive would be getting back up there with, let's say, the top 5 at the very least. But at the moment, they're scrapping around for points. And you wonder to yourself as well, Lando Norris, how long is he going to stick this out? Because we knew before he signed this contract, there were rumours of Red Bull being in for him. Mercedes,
Red Bull's a big one, isn't it?
Having a sniff as well. It's big teams showing some serious interest. And you look at Red Bull, for example, you've got both drivers tied down there at the moment, but if Mr. Norris were to come onto the market, as we saw last season, as Drive to Survive documented, all it takes is one driver to go, right, I've had enough for various reasons, be that retirement or going elsewhere, and a whole pack of cars comes falling down, if you will, or changing in some aspects. So I think that's the real make or break for me. If Lando Norris sticks it out for this season and then is still there next season, that is the general bellwether, if you will, the canary in the coal mine to see whether McLaren are going to perhaps have a blip of a season and then return to some competitiveness, or whether we're going to see a downgrade again in terms of them scrapping around for points versus scrapping around for podiums but years ago.
Yeah, if I was Lando Norris, I'd be looking at other places. It seems to me like every year drivers go to McLaren expecting the 2007, 2008 experience and would like to copy what Lewis Hamilton did. I realise that some of our listeners, Tom, are so young that 2007, 2008 wasn't in their like, peripheral memory. So
that is crazy.
So you may not know Lewis Hamilton started in McLaren because you may start watching when he started in Mercedes. I'm so old. So yeah, and he had great successes in McLaren, and then went off to Mercedes, and I think McLaren has never really recovered from that, which is an absolute shame. And now you expect McLaren to be one of the midfield teams that a really good driver can join, and will be pushing for 4th place, 5th place, and on an occasion be able to win a race just to prove themselves. But it's becoming more and more likely that Mercedes and I guess Ferrari have taken over that this year, and that's just pushing McLaren back. And with the other teams doing much better, it wouldn't surprise me if it will all swap, so that you'd look at other teams instead for your first drive. I mean, Toro Rosso's always been AlphaTauri and Toro Rosso before were always the alternative team that would get you into the sport like that. But if you were a young driver now, would you pick McLaren over someone a different program? Would you pick them over Williams? Well, probably not. You know what you're going to get with the Williams. Are you going to pick an AlphaTauri or an Alfa Romeo? Yeah, I think I probably would, because my guess the biggest issue at the moment with McLaren is you never know what you're going to get with them now, and that's really stung Oscar Piastri, because clearly he had an opportunity to join Alpine, and I probably should have took it.
Yeah, I mean, we saw Andreas Seidel leave McLaren to go to Alfa Romeo, soon to be backed by Audi, and the project going on there. And we thought to ourselves, is that a coincidence or is that a sign of things to come? And on that point of where drivers will go, you can see where team principals and back members of the staff room will go as well, engineers where they'll go as well, because you've got somewhere like Alfa Romeo backed by Audi, Sauber as well, who are on the ascendancy in the longer term, or at least there's more money going on there. You've got Alpine, who were very consistent, going from strength to strength in terms of solidifying their place in the midfield, or the best of the rest, aside from the giant competitors, if you will, with the exception being Aston Martin. And if Oscar Piastri is to have fallen foul of this, he won't be the first driver either, aside from many gone by. I mean, Fernando Alonso, for example, he went there expecting great things, returned nonetheless, didn't go very well. Jenson Button left Brawn to go there, didn't really pan out as he hoped. Lando Norris panned out well for a bit, but there's so many examples about where great drivers or aspiring drivers have gone there and things just haven't worked out. We've spoken previously about other constructors like Ferrari, for example, where you expect great things of them. Their reputation suggests going there is a good move, backing them as a good move, having good feelings about them in terms of their race pace and their ability to get points is a good move, but in reality doesn't always pan out. And it really is, in my mind, a sort of crossroads watershed moment for McLaren moving forwards, because you're seeing so many teams on the ascendancy. Williams, for example, not to mention Alpine and Alfa Romeo doing fine seemingly with their driver partnership. There's few sort of lame ducks on the grid, if you will. There's few teams that have designed poor cars or have inexperienced driver lineups, like in times gone by with Haas, for example. There's few examples of where you can go, oh well, okay, we'll beat them, that's easy. So I think, dare I say, McLaren are semi-delusional if they think they're going to rise up again and solidify, let's say, a 6th place or a 7th place or a 5th place, because in my mind they're scrapping now, and until they start scoring some solid points, that's not going to change in my mind. Don't know about you.
Yep. There is one glimmer of hope as well, is the investment that the McLaren are making into their project. So today they took Lando Norris to the state-of-the-art wind tunnel that McLaren has just finished building, which is, massive fan in it. I'm a big fan of the project, and so is everyone else, as it seems. So yeah, they are investing in it. Hopefully this will just be a dip. We were all very sad at the state of McLaren at the beginning of last season, and they ended up rising back up to the front, and perhaps like the cream in milk, it just takes a little while for the cream to start floating to the top. The McLaren's the cream, by the way. They're eventually floating back to the top, if you didn't understand the analogy.
For the avoidance of doubt.
Yeah.
So moving on then to the team which Lewis Hamilton went to after leaving McLaren, Mercedes, and they're looking quite strong compared to round one, for example, fighting more with the Aston Martins, beating Ferrari, albeit on strategy. Lewis Hamilton rising to 5th place from 7th. George Russell sniffing around a podium. Toto Wolff saying great words like, performance gains are there, we want to race a win soon. The language looking better, the performance is looking better, the results are looking better in round 2 Saudi Arabia. What's your thoughts there about Mercedes, Tristan? Do you think they can carry this on going into Australia? Could there be a slight dip maybe?
Well, I don't really know what to say about this car, because it seems like left, right and centre criticism is coming out about it. And that's not only limited to the press and Lewis Hamilton and George Russell, but also from, deep into Mercedes. They really do not like the W14, and Toto Wolff has been very, very vocal about the current direction, saying that they need to improve it in all areas, and they need to overhaul the car and go in a different direction. And so the rumours are that they are now developing a completely different car. I mean, Toto Wolff basically said as much, but when that car comes out, we've got to wait. I mean, they are basically doing, ironically, an Aston Martin from last year. And I know I keep saying this, but I keep saying it because it's true. Aston Martin started off with a car that looked different to everyone else's, realised why it looked different to everyone else's, and quickly changed it to look like Red Bulls and have developed it into this car for this year. Mercedes, kind of made the car work as best they could last year. They had that peak in Brazil when George Russell would take his first win and Hamilton would take second place after quite a good battle there. But the evolution and the step forward into this year has just been unacceptable, and Mercedes know that the limitations. They don't think they can make it work, and so they're moving on with it. So the question now is what can they do this year to improve it? Because the Mercedes design ethos is basically to have a massive floor, to have as much ground effect as possible, and reduce the side pod drag. But because of the way the regulations are now when it comes to minimum height of the car, because that was introduced to stop porpoising, and if you remembered that, then and the other teams basically optimizing the car in different ways to produce quite a lot of dirty air, as it turns out, Tom. I don't know if you realize, but in Saudi Arabia, the cars definitely showed themselves to be not as good as following each other as last year. And part of the reason is because designers are going to design, engineers are going to engineer, and they are making the air dirty. And the reason why the air is becoming dirtier than it was last year is because they are introducing more complex systems inside the car, under the floor or within the actual side pods to get more out of the air. And that means that the cars behind just can't follow as well, and that Mercedes really can't follow as well as they would have liked. So it's not really looking good for Mercedes at the moment. My sneaking suspicion is they take this year as well. We'll aim for third. I reckon that internally they're saying third, but maybe Ferrari can catch us up, say fourth. They'll take third, fourth. And if we don't get a car that looks very similar to Red Bull next year, I'll be very, very surprised. But if you were a driver, I wonder, Tom, if you were a driver, and let's say you're Lewis Hamilton, right? Let's say the twilight half decade of his career, and your team says, well, look, we know we got it wrong this year, but basically we're going to redesign the car completely next year to look like the winning car. Do you think that'd be enough to entice you to stay? That kind of promise of, look, there's success and we're going to copy it?
Yes, well, the clock is ticking, isn't it, firmly on Lewis Hamilton's career. I think few people thought he'd be fighting for world championships at his current age and sort of years gone by, if you will. Granted, there's been exceptions to that rule of once you get older, you fall down the pecking order in terms of performance. Fernando Alonso being a good example of that, but I don't know if a promise of we'll do better next year, Lewis, is good enough, really, because he was told that last year. And it's one thing to get the regulations wrong after there's been the biggest regulatory change in the sport's history. It's another thing to make the same mistake again. So if I were Lewis Hamilton, I would be not necessarily angling for a move per se, but just sort of saying to the teams out there who could promise me a better deal, I am open to a conversation. I know that's something he's not saying at the moment. Both him and Mercedes very much in lockstep saying, no, we're going to work together. There's no need for us to part ways. It would be wrong for both parties. I understand that. I get that owing to the credit in the bank that both have, namely Mercedes with their world championship designing ability, if you will, on many different occasions. But as we say so many times, there's peaks and troughs for different teams in Formula One. McLaren, I think, have peaked, and I think the Mercedes may have peaked now as well. And I think we're going into an era of dominance by Red Bull, where Red Bull will always be sniffing around the top step of the podium, the second, and maybe, well, the third on a bad day, put it that way. So if I'm Hamilton, I'm thinking of perhaps going elsewhere, but not nailing my colours to the mast, really, because I mean, we can say so many things about different drivers in terms of, oh, they should move early, oh, they should have moved earlier, this, that and the other. But when you're Lewis Hamilton, he's won the same amount of world championships as Michael Schumacher, when I think he still has his view that he was robbed of that championship in 2021. I won't pass comment on that at the moment. But when you have that desire to win again and that sort of sense of injustice, then I think you're perhaps going to be looking elsewhere. Do you think he's perhaps thinking of a move secretly? I know publicly it's very much a no, I'm staying with Mercedes, but do you think at the back of his mind, or indeed in his inner circle, people are going, well, it's worth having a conversation with other teams maybe?
Oh, well, he's probably going to go to Ferrari if rumours are true. They've been rumouring that for years. He's not going to go to Ferrari. No, I think he's going to stay where he is, actually. I think Mercedes, today there was an article about his 10 years since his Mercedes debut, and that was this was with Formula One, and he said that people always said that he was wrong, but he definitely came across that he wanted to be in Mercedes still, and he thinks he's in the right team. So I don't think he's going to move on from there. I think definitely his options would be very, very limited. But it's just going to be a matter of Mercedes getting their act together. And unfortunately, as I think we'll also discuss when we come on to Ferrari shortly, when it's a real shame that when you look at the teams this year and the diversity of concept that there is, you've got three or four different aero designs. You've got Mercedes' aero design, you've got Ferrari's concept, and you've got Red Bulls, and then you got these hybrids, and I would say that someone like Alpine fits into there a little bit. So maybe let's say 3.5, right? You got 3.5 design concepts at the moment, but it's going to be whittled down. Probably next year there'll be 2. The year after that maybe 1, which is Red Bulls, because the Ferrari's exploits for the bendy floor has been that loophole has been closed by a technical directive. I think it's 39, but don't quote me on that. And Mercedes just doesn't work. Just doesn't work at all. So that the really nice thing about the new design, the new rules, and the reason I always look forward to it is because you get these opportunities for teams to break out the gates with new concepts, with new ideas. And by the end of it, I think you get basically 1. And so Mercedes is giving up on theirs. They're not going to waste their time, especially when in a couple of years' time we'll have the new engine rules coming through as well. They can't waste their time with a failing aero design if the engine designs have to be updated to take into account the bigger batteries, the more the higher kilowatt output from the electrical motors and things like that. And so I think basically we're going to get a hybrid, so basically like I would call a Red Bull Plus sort of model, and at the moment I think the people that are doing that the most and doing that the best is perhaps Aston Martin. And so although it's really great that Toto has said, oh well, we're going to be redesigning the car, I mean, to be honest, I think the boat's kind of been missed with that. I think they should have done that last year. But this is what happens when you don't have as much wind tunnel time. Aston Martin did have way more wind tunnel. We can't forget that. More wind tunnel time because they did so badly last year to develop the car this year. And Mercedes is going to have to try and capitalise that as well to do better. So I think when discussing Mercedes this year, I think it's going to be really interesting to see whether or not they can scrape anything together a little part of me wants them to realise the key to unlocking the success of the no side pod design, the massive floor design, so that basically we can have two different designs of cars. Because I don't know if you remember, by the end of 2021, when the rules were changed and the designs changed, that 2021 season, all the cars looked very, very similar. They were the same sort of design ethos behind them, and unfortunately, there is always going to be that element of combining the designs. But Mercedes needs to get on that as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm. And taking you back to that Toto Wolff quote before we move on to Ferrari, that wants to win races soon. Do you think Mercedes will win a race this season, or is that not impossible, really?
Well, nothing's impossible, but I'd find it highly unusual if they did. Now, luckily for them, Ferrari's not doing as well as we were expecting. And again, we'll come on to that in a moment. But I know I'd say never say never, and there are unusual races in every season. We cannot forget that when McLaren won 2 years ago, well, they weren't the fastest car on the track. They were fourth. So it is possible, absolutely. But I think it's going to be an unusual situation. Maybe like a really rainy day. But when they do, when that comes along, every other team thinks the same thing. I mean, we said the same thing about Aston Martin. Well, Aston Martin can't win unless it rains. So we're going to have one rainy race this year, and we're going to be like, well, who's going to win, Mercedes or Aston Martin? They're both going to have to capitalise on it. And in the end, it may well be Red Bull, because Max is really good in the wet. Although so is Lance Stroll. I want to mention Lance Stroll was pretty good in the wet as well. So this may be his year if the right weather conditions come out on qualifying and the race day. Lance is good in the rain. So I have high hopes for that young gentleman this year.
Absolutely. I mean, that would be quite a funny image there in my mind, seeing Max Verstappen and Lance Stroll battling it out for a race when there's a bit of a sort of David and Goliath imagery going on there. I don't know about yourselves. But I suppose going on now to Ferrari, after we've been hinting at that for so long now, I think the story of Jeddah for them is good qualifying pace, P2 for Leclerc before he was docked down owing to a penalty, and P4 for Sainz, but bad race pace. Quotes coming out of Ferrari from the drivers like, we need some upgrades, lots of work needed everywhere. Have Ferrari taken a step back, Tristan, this weekend, do you feel?
Well, yes. Did you see... Well, I saw anyway. I'm not sure if you did. Do you see the... So if you look at how much pace that Ferrari have actually added to the car this year over last year, it's equated to 0.4 of a second. Ferrari have the lowest performance increase of any team from last year to this year. So that tells me that they have just not been able to develop the car. And why haven't they been able to develop the car? Well, in my opinion, and I'm just asking myself questions at this point. Why Tristan? Well, it's because I think part of the reason is the loophole closed that allowed them to exploit the bendy floor, so they can't run the car as low as they want. So that means and I think actually most of their design was built around this concept. And you might be thinking, well, why on earth would Ferrari design their whole car around one small exploitation? Well, the answer to that is because they've done it before. Don't forget. Do you remember the engine? The engine scandal between Ferrari and the rest of the paddock, Tom.
Yes, 2019, right?
So they got discovered as having a pretty dodgy engine, and then boom, 2020, they came out with a much more, should we say, I don't want to say legal because it implies the previous one wasn't legal, but an engine that was very much not in the grey area of legality, and suddenly they were way behind everyone else, and every Ferrari powered team struggled as well. So Ferrari, I think, have basically developed their whole car around this exploitation, and now it's backfiring. And that combined with reliability issues is going to cause them massive issues, because Charles Leclerc has now burnt through his whole allocation of electronic control units. So in the race, he had a 10-place grid penalty. I think last week I said 10-second penalty. I meant 10-place penalty. So yes, he managed to qualify well, but he had to go back 10 places. And so these reliability issues now being picked up on by Carlos Sainz as well, who said that they've got to do better because it's worrying him. So yeah, I think all round Ferrari have lost pace in terms of their delta between themselves and other teams, which means other teams are catching up on them. The reliability issues are coming to the forefront of their minds, and that, bear in mind, the car wasn't exactly reliable last year. No. I reckon Ferrari basically, lost itself the most points. In fact, I think Charles Leclerc even said that, and now they're at a point where everyone else is caught up with them, and so I can't see them being able to, really reclaim the successes and the prestige that they had last year. I mean, my goodness, it's a pretty looking car. It really is.
Yeah.
But it's maybe it's all looks. But yeah, no substance behind it. All style and no substance.
I was really surprised how poorly Ferrari did. I thought they would be at least battling it out with, let's say, I don't know, Aston Martin of Alonso on a good day, but firmly beating Mercedes. But now, in theory at least, looking at Jeddah in isolation, they're the fourth fastest car, and that is a big downgrade. That is a big loss of progress, if you will, when we consider that previously there was talk of them being the second team in terms of the pecking order behind Red Bull with ease, really. But that's no longer the case. Now, there's a question to be had about whether this is just a blip, whether this is just how they do at a Saudi Arabia type track where it's essentially all full throttle throughout, and they're perhaps not good in long-term pace. But it remains to be seen in my mind. When we have not only those issues but also mistakes again when it comes to comms, I believe Leclerc was misinformed about how fast he could go as the safety car was coming out. Granted, not a cataclysmic error, but when those errors are happening again, coupled with poor pace, how well can you do? Well, probably about P7 if you're Leclerc, for example, after rising from P12. Probably about P6 if you're Carlos Sainz, for example. When it comes to Ferrari, we realise they've not got the best car this season. Their chance to get a World Championship outright has sailed them by, but they're now in a sort of 2021 situation in my mind where they're qualifying well. The raw pace in terms of a Saturday qualification is fine, but race pace is lacking really, which means that communication, strategy and mistakes really must be avoided. It's got to be a seamless weekend in the paddock for Ferrari to get even close to the podiums really at this place. So same old mistakes really, it seems. It seems that despite Matteo Binotto going and there being a clear out of the house and Fred Vasseur coming in and organising an investigation into various different aspects and there being a new era for Ferrari in many different ways, it's the same old mistakes again, which is so annoying. But I suppose for Ferrari fans and for Formula One fans, they're not falling from so high as they fell last season, which doesn't make it any better, not great at all, but at least it makes it a softer landing, if you will. But similar to McLaren, I think that we're looking at a period now where Ferrari aren't going to be fighting for the top place of the podium for, dare I say, a while now, unless they really get their act together, which there's still hope that can happen, but I'm not convinced, judging by this weekend alone.
Yeah, I mean, I have no sympathy for Ferrari fans. I'm a McLaren fan. Join the club with your self-pity. Yeah, it's really difficult. As you say, there are some unique characteristics about Saudi Arabia. The fact that it's incredibly thin track and stupidly high speed, full throttle. So as we go to the tracks which are a bit slower, they might well be able to recover a little bit. But there's no hiding the fact that they are just slower. That's it. They're having to. Yeah. Especially in terms of Red Bull, I think I said this last year, they're just running more drag than Red Bull. They've got bigger wings. They can't produce as much ground effect, and that just means they're at disadvantage. I think they've got a bit of catching up to do this year, and maybe as well be align their car towards more like a Red Bull style car, which is something that I think they're going to have to take on their chin a little bit, ditching that design ethos that makes the car so unique looking. Well, if it's not working anymore, it's not working. But clearly, I think I'm quite excited to see how Ferrari are able to develop the car and take advantage of the fact that Red Bull won't be able to develop theirs. I think that's the one thing that will make this more interesting as we go forward. Fact is, Red Bull can't develop the car very much going forward, and everyone else can. And so what I would say is, if you're looking at this season and feeling a little bit down about it, remember that we have been here before and everyone does catch up. And the people at the top are playing with a handicap. It might not be apparent now, but it really will be, I hope, very, very soon. Or if not very, very soon, quite soon. So hang in there and pick another team to root for. If you know, I saw Formula One put out a post that said, these are your contenders for this year's Australian Grand Prix, and it had 20 pictures, and I expected it just to be 20 pictures of Max Verstappen, but it wasn't. It was for the whole grid. But that's how it feels at the moment.
It does, but there's reasons to be cheerful, but maybe not in this Grand Prix coming up, the Australian Grand Prix Round 3. Taking us back to last year, that man Leclerc qualified P1, converted that. Meanwhile, he was joined by Perez in second and George Russell in third after the checkered flag on the podiums. But for the upcoming race, it's very much a clean slate, new beginning for all. So Tristan, who's going to be on the podium this time around?
Well, I think number one is going to be a certain Max Verstappen. I think it's pretty much a safe bet at this point. Although last time that happened, I believe you, Tom, predicted it was going to be Sergio Perez who won. So
yes.
I may well be wrong, but it gets more interesting when we look at second and third place. I am hoping that Alonso can keep a streak up. Because I'm now having to root for a team, given that my team McLaren is right at the back. Picked Fernando Alonso this year. Seems like he's on the upward trajectory, and I think he's going to be fighting for second place. Third place, I think we're looking at an Aston Martin 2-3 finish.
Ooh, okay, right.
We have seen a Lance Stroll revival this year, and he seems to be challenging a little bit more than Alonso, a little bit more than we perhaps were expecting. And I think if they play the team game right, we could get both Aston Martins. So what's going to happen to Sergio Perez? I hear you say, what happened to Sergio Perez? Well, I reckon Sergio Perez is going to crash in the first corner. The first corner at Albert Park often receives, should we say, a little bit more action than we would perhaps like, even though they've sort of revised it just a smidge. I still think that there's going to be some drama at the front, especially usually when you're looking at the person fighting for second and third place off the line. So I think Max is going to steam ahead, and then Perez is going to sort of crash into someone. Maybe a Ferrari. Maybe it'll be like Perez and Leclerc crash out, and that will leave Fernando Alonso to sail forward, and Lance Stroll to sort of bumble his way through as well into the other the last step of the podium.
Excellent. So in my mind, it's slightly different. I'm going for Perez to win again. I think he's driving out of his skin. Probably the best driving he's ever done in his career, aside from the purple patch at the latter stages of his Racing Point career, particularly the win at the Saudi Grand Prix in 2020. He's going to keep that up, get P1. Verstappen will be second. I think he's going to have a strong weekend, but Perez will, by hook or by crook, pip him. And looking back at the prior race of 2022, where Leclerc won this, I think Leclerc is going to somehow get himself onto that podium in third place, and Alonso will retire, receiving no points. There we go.
Oh, poor Alonso. Not looking up for him, is it? According to you. But according to me, he's looking brilliant.
And finally, before we wrap up then, Tristan, aside from the top three, who needs to have a big weekend, be that driver or constructor?
Well, given that McLaren is signing on new partners and there are big questions surrounding Lando Norris and his future at the team, I think they've got to have a big weekend. Oscar Piastri, this is going to be his first home race.
Yeah,
and he doesn't want to be doing it at the back of the track. I tell you that. So I think that he and the team really need to show off their stuff, if only because Piastri, I think, having the home crowd and them having someone else get behind now that Daniel Ricciardo is not there. Oh, blimey. Imagine if they swapped out Lando Norris for Daniel Ricciardo for this one race. I'd have 2 Australian drivers in the at Melbourne. I think the Australians would be able to cope. They'd start storming the track in support. But I think my eyes are certainly going to be on McLaren, just because I need to see them getting some more performance out there, getting those points they desperately need. To say this week they demonstrated that they had opened their state-of-the-art wind tunnel. They've got Workday now signed onto their car as well. So maybe that's what they've been missing this whole time. Some a system for finance, HR, and planning. That's going to propel McLaren to the top. So yeah, I think we're going to really need to see them pull something quite interesting out the bag. I would like them to finish at least in 7th and 8th place, if not better.
In a similar fashion, I'm going to have my eyes on both drivers at Alfa Romeo Ferrari, because there were high hopes for me personally of this team moving forwards. We got Andrea Seidel coming in as well. You thought things are on the up, but not really setting the world alight. They've scored points once, that being a P8 for Mr. Bottas in Bahrain, but I mean, a shocking display by both drivers really in Saudi Arabia. Hampered by the strategy, granted, was Valtteri Bottas, but Zhou Guanyu, I mean, he's one of those drivers who we thought was going into his own and going to improve and get better with time and show why he was in Formula 1 and that it was not just all about the money he brought in, but I've not been too impressed by him so far. So he, Bottas, Alfa Romeo need to go and show why Audi are right to back them, why they're right to go on this new project, and why really they're better than their previous cycle of success then regress, because that's been the cycle so often for that team when I'd like to change, please. And it seems that's all we got time for in terms of episode 6 of F1 in Review. Thank you very much for listening all the way to the end of this one, be that on your preferred podcast provider or elsewhere. A reminder, you can follow us on Twitter and on TikTok, our handle being F1 in Review. And we look forward now to round 3, as we were saying, about the Australian Grand Prix coming up. If you're watching, listening, or indeed keeping up with it in the UK, qualifying on Saturdays at 6 p.m, that being British summertime, that being April the 1st, someone's certain birthday here. And then race is on Sunday, 6 a.m, that being British summertime as well, if you're watching, keeping up, or indeed listening in the UK. And we will of course be back to dissect, look forward and delve deep into all the good things, bad things and things in between from round 3 of this season. Until next time, thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you in about a week's time.